All right, so this is lesson 1, which is all about square roots. So we're going to be able to simplify square roots by the end of this lesson. So concepts. Square roots are the reverse operation of squaring a value. Numbers whose square roots are integers are called perfect squares. So for example, the square root of 4 equals 2. So 4 is a perfect square because 2 times 2 equals 4. So the square root of that number, square root of 4, is 2. The square root symbol is called a radical sign. You can use a calculator to determine the approximate value of a square root or simplify square roots as shown below. So when we're calculating the value of a square root, to estimate the value of a square root, I can use a calculator. Some calculators require you to enter the value first and then press the square root key, usually second and then the radical sign. And others require you to press the square root key and then enter the value. You will need to determine which method your calculator uses. Most of the TI-83s that you'll be using, or most of the calculators that you'll be using, will use the second method where you hit the square root and then you hit the number. So when we find the root of the square root of 18, I round to the nearest tenth. So I press second, square root, and type 18, and then I press enter. So I get 4.24264068, and it's going to keep going because it's an irrational number. So when I'm rounding the answer to the nearest tenth, I'm looking at this decimal place right here, okay? Because that's my 10th place. So I'm going to look right here at the number next to it, which happens to be a 4. The 4 tells me that I don't round up, I stay the same. So 4.2 is going to be my final answer. A test-taking tip. Use a calculator that you know how to use. Understand how the features of the calculator work, including how to enter expressions into the calculator. Make sure your calculator has fresh batteries and is working properly prior to the day of the test. Okay? So you all will be using the exact same type of calculator for a Keystone or a PSSA test, okay? And they're the yellow calculators that you've seen since middle school. So those are the calculators that you'll be using for the test, okay? And I have some in my classroom that you're welcome to use as well. Simplifying square roots. Square roots that are not perfect squares can sometimes be simplified. To simplify a square root, I factor the number inside the radical into prime factors. So each pair of the same factor can be moved to the outside of the radical. Simplify the factors on the outside of the radical by multiplying, and then do the same to the inside. So if I'm simplifying the square root of 160, I want to think about what times what gives me 160. Well, I know that 2 times 80 is 160. 2 I know is a prime number, but 80 is not. So then 2 times 2 times 40, because 2 times 40 gives me 80. 40 is not prime. Then 2 times 2 times 2 times 20. And I can keep going. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 10, which equals 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. So factor the 160 inside the radical. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 5, okay, which is what we did up here. Start with an easy one. If you know that the number is even, start with 2 first because 2 is a prime number. So figure out that divided by 2 and then start breaking down the number, okay? Step 2. Since there are 2 pairs of 2's and 1 2 from each pair can be removed from the radical, think of it as 2 times 2 is 4 and the square root of 4 is 2. So a 2 is placed on the outside. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this set of 2's and one of them goes on the outside. This set of 2's and one of them goes on the outside. So you can see down here, 2 times 2. I'm left over with 2 and a 5, okay? And that 2 and a 5, I can't take those out because there's only 1 2 and 1 5. Okay? I have to have a set. I have to have a pair, okay? So I repeat the steps for all pairs as shown. So then I bring that 2 out. I bring the second 2 out. They're now outside of my radical. I multiply those numbers together. 2 times 2 gives me 4. And I multiply what's left on the inside. 2 times 5 gives me 10. So I'm left with 4 times the square root of 10. This is my final answer. It cannot be simplified any more than that, okay? The following examples demonstrate 2 additional methods of determining your understanding of simplifying square roots. So, example 3, an expression is shown below, the square root of 14x. For which value of x should the expression be further simplified? Okay. So I know that 14 is broken down into 2 and 7, okay? So I want to think about this x. Which of these numbers also has a 7? Well, 15 is 3 times 5. 23 is prime. 35 is 5 times 7, and 37 is also prime. Okay? So that means 35 would have to be my x value. Because if I do times 35, this breaks down into 5 times 7, and then I have a 7 in common, which can come out. So C is going to be my answer. Okay. So I factor the coefficient of x inside the radical 2 times 7 times x. I factor each of the values. I see that this is prime and this is prime, but I have 5 times 7. So compare the factors and match the factors from step 1 and step 2. Only one of the answer choices should have one or more matching factors. This answer choice is the correct answer. In this example, both the number in the radical and choice C have a factor of 7. Therefore, C is your correct answer. Check your work by replacing x with the value you selected and simplifying the square root as shown below. So 14 times x, 14 times 35 is 490, which simplifies to 7 and square root of 10. Since the square root of 490 can be simplified to 7 square root of 10, the answer is correct. Okay, so basically what they did was they double checked their work. All right, let's try example 4. An expression is shown below, 2 times the square root of 23x. Which value of x makes the expression equivalent to 10 times the square root of 23? Okay, so I want to think about what I needed to multiply on the outside to get to 10. So if I go from 2 to 10, well, 2 times 5 equals 10, right? Okay. So that means that I need to have x be 2 sets of 5, because in order to get it out, I have to have a set of 2, right? I have to have 2 of the same number. So if I think about this, 5 is 5 times 1, right? 5 times 1. 10 is 5 times 2, no match yet. 25 is 5 times 5, oh, there's a double. And 50 is 2 times 5 times 5. Okay. So I factored each of these out. I know that I need to get 5 on the outside, but when I take it out, remember I need 2 of them. So that means that I can eliminate A and B because I'm looking for a pair. Okay. So now I'm left with 25 and 50. So I've eliminated 2 of my answers. Great. Okay. I'm going to look at the radical now. 23 is what's left, which means 23 is what's left in my original too, which means I didn't do anything to that 23, which means there's no other number left in the radical for me to be able to simplify or multiply through. So if I say that 23 times 25, where x is 25, remember I can simplify this. 23 is prime. 25 is 5 times 5, right? This is a pair. So this can come outside. Okay, and I already have the 2 out here. Okay. So now I have a 5 out here as well. 5 times 2 is 10. And then I'm left with 23 underneath the radical sign. Okay. So that means my answer has to be C. So there are a couple of exercises below. There is a Google form for you to fill out with the answers, okay? So if you don't have a calculator at home, that's fine. You can actually just use Google. So if you type in calculator in Google, it'll pop one up for you. So it'll look like this. Okay, so here's Google. All I have to do is type in calculator. So here's my calculator. So if I wanted to find the square root of 7, so it actually types everything in for you. So if I do square root of 7, then it's in parentheses, equals, and then it gives me my answer, okay? So for this one, just hit backspace, okay? So for this one, I hit the square root sign first and then the number, okay? So if it's on the outside, so if I wanted to do, say, 2 square root of 6, you do that too, okay? Notice that this is going to give you a decimal, all right? It's not going to simplify it for you. It's just going to give you a decimal version, which is fine as long as that's what the question's asking for. So in this case, I'm asking to estimate the values of the following square roots to the nearest tenth, okay? So these I can use a calculator for. B, I want to simplify the following square roots and then use a calculator to verify my answer. So simplify first using the methods that we used previously in examples 2, 3, and 4. Okay. And then C, find a value of X that allows each expression to be further simplified. Okay. So for these, make sure that you break them down first. So like 22, break it down into its prime factors, figure out what you can take out. Okay. And then figure out what value of X you can take more numbers out of. Okay. D, find the value of X that makes each expression true. Okay. So what value would X be in order to, like for this one, what value of X could I use to make 6 and the square root of 29X equal to 12 times the square root of 29? Those are very similar to this right here, what we just did for example 4 and example 3. Okay. Okay, and then there's also a lesson post-test. Please complete this after you've completed the lesson, okay? And that is it for lesson 1.